So today I want to do another lo-fi reading video. I bought another mic, so I now have the capability to record in binaural and it shouldn't sound like crap, which is a positive. At some point I want to do just like a typing sounds video just to hear if it sounds any different. I'll probably do it with lo-fi as well. My girlfriend wanted something along those lines. But for right now, just to test out binauralness, I'm going to read a little bit and probably type a little bit. I'm reading that same book. I was reading in the last video, The Age of Sustainable Development, but now it should be binaural. We'll see. So this should be left, and this should be right. I've had to download all this audio engineering software in order to get this to work properly. It's quite complicated. I don't really think I could do it again if I tried. I also have plugins to my audio engineering that get rid of static sound, which seems to be working quite well. We'll see how it sounds when it all comes out. Anyway, the steam engine made possible new forms of transport as well, including steam-powered railroads and steam-powered ocean freighters. The far greater energy also allowed a far greater scale of industrial transformation of materials than ever before. The production of steel soared, and this is in turn made possible the massive expansion of cities, industries, and infrastructure of all kinds. The transformation of life was dramatic and often traumatic. One of the fiercest critics of the harshness of early industrialization was, of course, none other than Karl Marx. Marx and his co-author Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848 as a kind of ironic tribute to the power of the new industrial economy and the breakthroughs in industrial technology. Marx and Engels described this new world in vivid language. Modern industry has established the world market from which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has in its turn reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railroads extended in the same proportion, the bourgeoisie, the new capitalist class, developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. A new world indeed has arrived, one that would overrun the old and create a new global age, in part based on European colonial domination, powered by the new industrialization. As Marx and Engels famously put it, the bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap price of commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations on pain of extinction to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilizations into their midst, to become bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The great waves of technological change. defined economic. By the early 19th century, the new era of modern economic growth was now underway. Markets and technological advance drove this process, first in a highly uneven way and eventually to nearly the entire world, as Marx foresaw. This is the period that Simon Kuznets, the great Nobel laureate, economic historian, and conceptualizer of economic development, called the era of modern economic growth. We have defined economic growth as the sustained increase of GDP per person for a global average. We sum the national GDP to find the gross world product, which we divide by the world population. For more than 200 years now, the era of modern economic growth, the GWP per capita has increased on a sustained basis, though in a very uneven way across the different regions of the world. A few of the world's poorest countries still have not achieved the takeoff of modern economic growth that other countries experienced 2 centuries ago. We need to understand that global growth process. In order to do so, we need to make a quiet basic distinction between 2 kinds of economic growth. Each one is characterized by sustained increase of output per person, but each has a very distinct underlying dynamic. One kind of growth is the growth of world's technological leaders. In the early 19th century, that was certainly England. In the middle to the end of the 19th century, it was Germany and the United States. In the 20th century, the United States was by far the most technological dynamic country in the world. The technological leaders had a very particular kind of economic growth, driven by restless technological advance, in which advances in one technology tend to spur advances in other technologies as well, though through new innovations and new combinations of processes. For example, after James Watt invented his improved steam engine in 1776, it was taken up in textiles, mines, steam-powered rails, steam-powered ships, steel production, and countless other areas. Each of these sectors became its own site of technological advances. Economists have given a name to this kind of growth. Interesting. Endogenous growth. Endogenous means something that arises from within a system, rather than from outside the system. Endogenous growth means economic advancement that emerges from the internal workings of the economy. In its simplest description, a technological breakthrough raises GDP, which in turn raises the incentive for innovation. More generally, since a higher GDP offers the prospect of higher profits for new products and processes, these new innovations raise GDP still further, spurring yet more innovations, and the innovations combine in novel ways, giving rise to new kinds of equipment, machinery, industry, and manufacturing techniques. There's a second kind of growth of a laggard country that, for whatever reason of history, politics, and geography, lagged behind as the technological leaders charged ahead. China, for example, did not industrialize until the 19th century. At some point, countries like China and today's emerging economies began to catch up by drawing on the technologies and organizational systems of the leaders. The kind of growth is very different from endogenous growth. It is sometimes called catch-up growth. lag behind begin to catch up by drawing on technologies and organization systems of the use. The essence of the strategy is to import technologies from abroad rather than to develop them at home. It is still true that even imported technologies need to be adapted to local conditions, but they do not need to be invented and tested anew. Catch-up growth can be considerably faster than endogenous growth. Technological leaders have tended to grow at around 1 to 2% per capita, while the fastest catching up countries like South Korea and China have enjoyed per capita GDP growth of 5 to 10% per annum. No technological leader has ever sustained such rapid growth rates, and no laggard country has sustained them after the point of catching up with the leading countries. Super rapid growth is about closing gaps, not about inventing whole new economic systems or technologies. These two different mechanisms of growth, the first one based on continuing innovation and the second one based on closing gaps by adopting and adapting the technologies of these countries ahead of them, are two major ways that economic growth proceeds in the world. The failure to recognize the fundamental differences between endogenous and catch-up growth has led to all sorts of confusion in the discussion of economic development. For example, the kinds of institutions that countries need in order to innovate and spur endogenous growth are typically quite different from the institutions needed to promote rapid catch-up growth. The first is based on innovation, the second on rapid adoption and diffusion of existing, though mostly foreign, technology. Catch-up growth, a strong role of government, as in China and South Korea and Singapore, for example, can often be a major spur to the rapid adoption of advanced technologies from abroad. Innovation per se is not important, as the rapid development of infrastructure and the ability to link the domestic economy with high-tech foreign companies from abroad. This can be done, for example, by enticing foreign companies to invest in high-tech production in the catch-up economy, both to serve the fast-growing home market and to produce goods at low cost for exports to the world market. Let us focus on endogenous growth, the growth of technological leaders, in this section of the text, and then turn to catch-up growth in the following section. Economists sometimes call endogenous growth a process of dynamic increase returns to scale, or a chain reaction economy. Innovations spur further innovations, keeping the growth process alive, just like a nuclear chain reaction. The basic mechanism is the following. A new innovation causes the growth of GDP. This in turn increases the purchasing power of the market for further innovation. Other potential inventors therefore scale up their own R&D in search of profitable innovations. Some of these R&D efforts prove to be successful, increasing the GDP still further, and thereby spurring even more R&D. The process continues in a chain reaction of innovation, economic growth, and then further innovation. And the innovation process is helped by the fact that these industrial innovations can be combined to produce new innovations. The Industrial Revolution, for example, began with steam power, and then with advances in steel production, and those two sectors permitted an explosion of innovation in other kinds of heavy machinery, including the railroads, ocean steamers, and eventually the breakthrough of automobiles based on the internal combustion engine. Ever since the onset of the Industrial Revolution, there have been waves of technological change, often bunched together because of the incentives of a growing marketplace and the R&D potential of combining new technologies. We speak loosely of the steam age and the age of electricity, the age of the automobile, the age of aviation, and so on. There have also been many theories of these technological waves. Perhaps the most influential in economic history has been that of Russian economist Nikola Kondratiev, who worked at the time of the Russian Revolution and whose greatest masterwork, The Major Economic Cycles, was published in 1925. Kondratiev's main idea was that economic development was propelled by waves of major technological change dating back to the Industrial Revolution. He regarded these long waves of technological change as the main drivers of economic advancement, and also as the sources of economic crisis when the growth dynamics of one cycle reached their conclusion while the next technological wave has not yet gathered force. Followers of Kondratiev today generally identify roughly 4 to 6 such long waves of technological change. One such illustrative classification with 5 such waves is shown in Figure 3.2. I would like to emphasize here that different researchers in the Kondratiev tradition come up with somewhat different timing and labels for the technological waves. In the classification in Figure 3.2, the first of the Kondratiev waves put the steam engine at the core from 1780 to 1830, roughly from the time of James Watt's invention to its widespread application. This classification seems to be unimpeachable. The steam engine truly defines the first breakthrough of modern economic growth. The second of the technological waves is the great burst of railway building and steel production, dating to around 1830. These are crucial applications built upon the steam engine. The growing metals industry and the development of precision engineering. These technologies transform national economies and the world economy by dramatically reducing the transport costs and thereby linking different markets. Primary commodities such as coal and ore deposits or grain and timber production overseas could now be profitably shipped and traded in the international markets. I think I should write about the Kondratiev waves. And this is an endogenous growth. Kondratiev waves. 1. Steam engine. First breakthrough of modern. That is not how you spell modern. Built upon steam engine created a world economy. Age of electricity. Electricity generation through coal-fired steam turbines and hydropower created the new power generation industry. The fourth wave. Age of the automobile. Expanded mass transport allowed the growth of major cities. Fifth wave. Brought new materials including explosives, chemical fertilizers, dyes, and eventually polymers, including plastics. Modern aviation of the first half of the 20th century. While the underlying technology for the automobile, including the internal combustion engine, began the second half of the 19th century. Mass production of automobiles and trucks deeply transformed the way we live, where we live, and how we produce goods, and of course, how we ship and trade goods in the economy. Fifth wave. Information and communications technology. Made possible by the digital revolution. Fundamentally, the digital revolution is built on the realization that complex information can be stored as zeros and ones, bits. And these bits of information can be processed and transmitted with unimaginable speed and precision through new inventions such as transistors to process and store the information, and fiber optics to transmit massive amounts of information. The invention and spread of mobile phones and now smartphones and other handheld devices has made the ICT revolution also a mobile revolution, where information can be readily reach every nook and cranny of the planet, combined with the advances in space science, notably satellite systems, ICT, breakthroughs in geopositioning, mapping, spatial planning, and countless other applications of geographic information. The ICT revolution, the wave we are living through now, builds on waves of scientific and technological innovations. Intellectual giants such as Alan Turing and John von Neumann and Claude Shannon pioneered the basic concepts of digital information and computation in the 1930s and 1940s. World War II gave a major spur to countless technologies, including semiconductors, radar, digital communications, computers, coding, and others. The invention of the transistor at the end of the 1940s was the next crucial step in the ICT revolution, and in turn led to the concept of the integrated circuit in the 1950s, which in turn spurred the modern computer revolution. Beginning in the late 1950s, the newly invented integrated circuit gave rise to an imaginatively dynamic process of technological advances based on the ability to pack more and more transistors into an integrated circuit and thereby give rise to an upward spiral of the capacity to store, process, and transmit bits of information. In 1964, Gordon Moore, then the CEO of Intel, noted the phenomenon that the transistor count on an integrated circuit was doubling roughly every 18 to 24 months and had been doing so since the late 1950s. He predicted that this doubling process would continue for years into the future. Indeed, it has continued until now. There's been roughly 58 years of Moore's Law, which means around 30 doublings of transistors on an integrated circuit. 30 doublings, or 2 to the 30, equals 1,073,741,824. The capacity to manage bits and bytes of information has increased by roughly 1 billion times since the mid-1950s. Add to that the ability to transmit the information through satellites, fibers, and microwaves, and we have arrived at the mobile information revolution. In the 1980s, almost all telephony was carried on fixed landlines telephony, and most of the world was still without a telephone. As of 1990, there were around 50 million cell phone subscribers, all in the high-income world. As of 2014, there are roughly 7 billion mobile subscribers and around 1 billion smartphone users. Mobile telephony now reaches the world's most remote villages. By 2020, almost all of the world will be within reach of wireless broadband. The internet and its own technological marvels, such as asynchronous packet switching, and its globally shared protocols and standards means that the world of online information is now commonly accessible, or at least potentially accessible, by nearly all parts of global society. Will there soon be a contractive sixth wave of technological change? The one we really need now is a wave of sustainable technologies. ways to produce and mobilize energy and to transport ourselves and transport goods to relieve the massive human pressures and human-caused destruction of the Earth's ecosystem. Indeed, one could say that spurring the sixth wave, the wave of sustainable technology, is a core part of achieving sustainable development. We now need to promote the next great wave, sustainable technologies. Fortunately, many of the advances and insights of the fifth wave will be helpful for the sixth. Energy efficiency, sustainable materials, nanotechnologies, and breakthroughs in sustainable chemistry and food production will all benefit enormously from the recent advances of computation science and information technology. Alright, that's it for now. Hopefully the binaural sounds better than it did before. Let me know what y'all think. Like and subscribe. Have a good